We should start. Welcome, good evening to you all, and welcome, but a special welcome, of course, to Edith Hall, Professor Edith Hall, who's going to speak tonight to this great title, Aristotle Goes to the Movies. I can't wait. Over the years, Edith has held posts. Many of you will probably know this, but I didn't know this when I investigated your background, in posts in Cambridge, Oxford, Durham, as well as London universities, and of course at the moment she is a professor of classics at King's College, London. Edith has published more than 20 books and has written extensively for academic and mainstream journals. She broadcasts frequently, I've heard her, on radio and television, and works in addition as a consultant for professional theatres, including the Royal Shakespeare Company, National Theatre, Northern Broadsides, among others. She's a co-founder and consultant director of the Archive of Performance of Greek and Roman Drama at Oxford, and the chairman of the Gilbert Murray Trust. I can go on, but it's already extraordinarily diverse and impressive, but also cumulative over, of course, many years of enormous contribution. In May this year, and it is worth mentioning this, of course, you're going to publish Aristotle's Way, How Ancient Wisdom Can Change Your Life. What a great title. I'm also a publisher. I said to you earlier, I run a publishing company called Polity Press. We would love a book called Aristotle's Way, How Ancient Wisdom Can Change Your Life. A winning title from, as you all know, a winning author. Please join with me in giving her a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, David, for a lovely introduction. Thank you for inviting me, and it is so wonderful to be reunited old friends. I was here at a very important time in my life personally, between 2001 and 2006, as Professor of Greek Cultural History, and have extraordinarily happy memories, both of the Classics Department and my friends here, and actually just of the city and the people. So, one of the greatest ancient commentators on Aristotle, Themistius, said that he was more useful to the mass of the people than other thinkers. And the same is still true. Pursuing Aristotle's idea of happiness, eudaimonia, is a very specific type of ethics, virtue ethics. Finding a purpose in life in order to realize your potential is paramount. And this is supported by working on your behavior in order to become the best possible version of yourself. You are your own moral agent, but you act in an interconnected world where partnerships with other people are significant. Aristotle actually says that happiness could potentially be very widespread, since it can be attained through some process of study or effort by all persons whose capacity for virtue hasn't been damaged. This is not just something for a tiny minority of people with a degree in philosophy from Durham. He also thinks that the world would be a much better place if everyone tried out his ethical ideas, and I agree. Sadly, all the surviving works of Aristotle are based on his own researches and the lecture notes he used in teaching his students. They are dense and strenuous to read. But Aristotle himself, far from looking down on popularizing works, actually wrote many himself. His lectures to public audiences, known in antiquity as his exoteric works, exoteric just means outward-facing or designed for the public. The most famous was his Protrepticus, or encouragement to philosophy. This was a popular classic for every man. A cynic thinker named Crates came across it one day as he sat in a shoemaker's workshop, and he read it in one go. And the text expressed Aristotle's passion for philosophy, saying that what differentiated humans most from other animals, and, as he puts it, brings them closest to God, is the sheer power of the human mind. The lost exoteric works made Aristotle's ideas available to the ordinary ancient Greek who was interested in pursuing happiness and living with integrity, but did not have the leisure, money, or opportunity to pursue academic studies full-time. But one way of learning about Aristotelian philosophy is to combine enlightenment with pleasure and do it through the arts, in particular today, the movies. Now, Aristotle was born into a medical family in 384 BCE. His dad, Nicomachus, was hired as personal physician by the then king of Macedon, Amyntas III. But Aristotle's own childhood was disrupted. Both his father and mother died when he was a teenager, and in his 17th year, he moved to Athens and enrolled in Plato's Academy. After 2 decades, when Plato died, he traveled and studied in northwest Asia Minor and the island of Lesbos. But everything changed in 343 when he was summoned by Philip II of Macedon, the grisly one-eyed, to teach the young Alexander. And the international political situation became completely explosive as Philip expanded the Macedonian Empire. And Aristotle may well have spent 338 to 336 BCE when Philip was finally assassinated and Alexander became king, keeping a low profile in the Western Balkans. At nearly 50 years old, he grasped his opportunity. He did not accompany Alexander on his campaign to the east. Okay, this is where I've got to do this. Despite, yes, what happened in Robert Rosson's epic movie Alexander the Great, 1956, starring Richard Burton in a very odd wig as Alexander. He wasn't a young man, about 49, nowhere near as old as he's actually made out to be in Oliver Stone's movie, when he went off to Athens to found the Lyceum, and he'd been at the beck and call of others since he was a teenager. His time had come and he knew it. He arrived in Athens and he founded his Lyceum, the first research and teaching university in the world. Most scholars think it was only in the golden 12 years of his mature life as head of the Lyceum, which gives us hope for us all if it only started at 50, that he wrote the treatises which survive, in addition to all the others, at least 130 which do not survive. One which has very sadly been lost is the second book of his Poetics. And just what a loss this has been to world culture was illustrated by Umberto Eco's medieval detective story, The Name of the Rose, 1980, made into a film starring Sean Connery in 1986. At the climax of both book and film, the very last surviving copy of Aristotle's Thoughts on Comedy is destroyed in a blaze started by a monk who believes all laughter is sinful. And Eco's idea may actually reflect the true reason why this precious work was not transmitted to our world. Now, my own interest in Aristotle started 4 decades ago. At 13 years old, and the daughter of an ordained Anglican priest, I lost my religion. But this left a very big hole in my life. Oh dear. Sorry. That's where we are. As a younger child, I was in no doubt at all that I would go to heaven if I was good. But now, at 13, I felt like Antonius Bloch in Ingmar Bergman's classic movie The Seventh Seal, 1957. Antonius Bloch is a religious skeptic during the 14th century plague who says nobody can live with death before his eyes if he thinks oblivion lies at the end. It may be no coincidence that Bergman is also the child of a Protestant priest. I no longer believe that there was anyone out there in the cosmos who policed my life, or rewarded or punished me for being virtuous or vicious, respectively. I did not know what to put in his place, but I did actually still long to be not only happy, but a good person. Studying classics, I briefly became interested in ancient Epicureanism, which makes a certain kind of pleasure, hedone, a primary goal of human life. And in fact, utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham had revived this principle. But Bentham was interested in the total amount rather than the type of pleasure. If film actor Errol Flynn was telling the truth about his mental experience in his dying words, then on the intensity and duration measurements of the quantitative hedonist view, he'd been a very happy man. Indeed. Oh, that was Bergman, sorry. Let's get on to Errol Flynn. He reportedly said, as he died, "I've had a hell of a lot of fun and I've enjoyed every minute of it." Bentham's disciple, John Stuart Mill, saw that on the quantitative hedonism account, human happiness did not necessarily differ from the happiness of pigs. So Mill introduced the idea there were different levels and types of pleasure. Bodily pleasures that we share with animals, such as the pleasure we get from eating or sex, are lower pleasures. But mental pleasures, such as those that we derive from the arts and intellectual debate or good behaviour, are higher and much more valuable. Now, very few 21st century philosophers advocate hedonistic approaches to achieving what I call subjective happiness. The theory was dealt a very severe blow in 1974 when Harvard professor Robert Nozick envisioned a machine capable of giving people hooked up to it a continuous set of pleasurable experiences throughout their lives. And in his model, advanced brain science would mean that these people wouldn't actually be able to differentiate these simulated experiences from those gained separately in the real world. But the question is, would anyone choose to be hooked up to the machine over living real lives? And almost everyone asked that question says no. And Nozick's thought experiment grabbed the public imagination and is reflected famously in the orgasmatron machine in Woody Allen's Sleeper. Maybe a day will come when most humans would opt for the certainty of perpetual orgasm over the risky business of lived experience, but that day has not come yet. We want to be happy, but we do seem to believe that being happy is the result of more than just favourable experiences. Now, the most famous statement ever made by Aristotle, so famous that it was very inaccurately quoted in an exchange of fire between Pope Francis and Donald Trump in February 2016, is that man is a political animal, a zoon politikon. By this, Aristotle meant that man is indeed an animal, which was actually quite a revolutionary thought then, as it still is, but is distinguished from other animals by naturally tending towards gathering together to live in a large settled community, a polis or city-state. What really makes a human, because no other living being, plant or animal shares it, is what Aristotle calls the active life of the being that has reason. Humans do things and are able to think rationally before, during, and after those activities. So, exercising your reason in a way that means you want to live well means cultivating virtues and avoiding vices. This will make you happier. There's a reason why Frank Capra's feel-good fantasy It's a Wonderful Life is the most popular Christmas movie of all time. And that's because its message resonates with the generous and cooperative values most humans share. George Bailey, played by James Stewart, is a troubled philanthropic businessman persecuted by a rapacious capitalist. He's planning suicide on Christmas Eve, but a guardian angel called Clarence, through flashbacks, shows George episodes from his past life. He's been a devoted family member. He's offered loans allowing the poor to buy their own houses. Clarence persuades George out of suicide by showing him an alternative version of history in which he'd never existed. His family had been deprived of him, and the poor had had to live in slums. George now sees that his wonderful life had connected him to other people by his efforts to support them. And the movie is also deeply Aristotelian in that it asks George and all of us who watch it to think detachedly about our lives as a project, a continuous arc which is as wonderful as we choose to make it. However cheesy the film may now seem, it does strike an authentic emotional chord. There's also a serious movie that eschews all sentimentality and I think deserves equal exposure, which shows a young person at the brink of adulthood and full moral agency who learns that gratification comes with being good, La Promesse. At the beginning of the film, Igor is 15 years old, a trainee mechanic, but he faces a very extreme ethical challenge and succeeds in establishing moral independence from his unscrupulous father. The plot involves the accidental death of an illegal immigrant and his father's insistence that Igor help him to conceal it. But Igor, even as a teenager, comes to moral maturity and actually a degree of serenity, eudaimonia, by assisting the bereaved family in the most unpromising circumstances: an unfeeling dad, feelings of guilt, social vulnerability, and fear of the law. For Aristotle, character traits and emotions are almost all acceptable, indeed necessary to a healthy psyche, provided that they're present in the right amount. And he calls the right amount the middle or mean, the meson. A sexual appetite, since humans are animals, is a very good thing in the right proportion. On the other hand, too much or too little sexual appetite are both conducive to unhappiness. Anger is essential to a healthy personality. Someone who never feels anger, he says, is not always going to do the right thing and will not, therefore, achieve happiness. Yet too much anger is also a shortcoming or defect, a vice. It's always a question of the right amount at the right time. Now, one of the trickiest areas in ethics is the nexus of issues around envy, anger, and desire for revenge. In the academic community, we're very familiar with these. And all three are central to the plot of the Iliad retold in Troy. The most important Greek king in terms of status, Agamemnon, envies Achilles because Achilles is a better warrior. Agamemnon humiliates Achilles publicly, expropriates his concubine Briseis. Achilles is furious. To this anger with Agamemnon, there's added the wrath when the Trojan Hector kills Patroclus, Achilles' best friend in battle. Achilles gets his revenge on Agamemnon by receiving compensation and the restitution of Briseis. He slakes his thirst for revenge on Hector by killing him in single combat, mutilating his corpse, and also executing 12 entirely innocent Trojan youths by sacrificing them on Patroclus' pyre. This is arguably excessive. Aristotle writes most insightfully about these dark impulses. In the case of envy, we know that he was the target of it. Despite being by far the best philosopher of his generation, he was passed over as candidate for the leadership of the Academy, where he'd studied for 2 decades in 348 BCE when Plato died. The other academicians found Aristotle's effortless brilliance hard to stomach and chose a profoundly dull philosopher, called Speusippus instead. As an Aristotelian who wrote a history of philosophy later put it, the great man incited so much envy simply because of his friendships with kings and the sheer superiority of his writings. Now, there's no one amongst us who has not envied people who they believe enjoy more money or better looks or better luck in love than they do. If something we would like very much, but that no amount of effort can guarantee, better health, a baby, professional recognition, fame, then it can be almost unbearable to see those with whom we customarily compare ourselves acquire them. Now, actually, there's a sense in which this can be a very healthy response. It can motivate steps to remedy unfairness of any kind. It can be expressed at work by campaigning for legislation guaranteeing equal pay for equal work. It can be expressed politically in disapproval of a social system which allows a big gap between rich and poor. There is good envy. But envy of people because of what is just a purely natural endowment, such as Aristotle's intellectual gifts, is a happiness wrecker. It warps the envious person's personality and becomes obsessive. It leads to wholly undeserved attacks on the naturally endowed target of the envy. And in the modern world, these often take the form of vicious trolling or cyber attacks. In extreme cases, envy can lead to the whole of society being deprived of works of genius if the gifted person's career is successfully stalled. And the toxic effects of this type of envy on all concerned has never been better dramatised than in Peter Schaffer's 1979 play Amadeus, which he adapted to become the screenplay of Milos Forman's multiple Oscar-winning movie in 1984. The play is now playing utterly brilliantly at the National Theatre. The mediocre composer Salieri became obsessively envious at the ease with which his younger rival Mozart produced sublime masterpieces. He frustrates Mozart's career in every way he can. On his deathbed, he confesses that he actually poisoned him. This means not only that Mozart did never complete the Requiem, but since he died in his mid-30s, that we, the world, have been deprived of dozens of wonderful works he might have produced if he had lived longer. This is very unfair. Salieri, actually after Mozart's orphan son, after he died, it's complete fiction. I just have to say that on Salieri's behalf. But let us go with the movie. The worldwide success of the movie shows how much the portrayal of envy as an obsessive force resonates across cultures. Aristotle recommends that the biggest favour you can do yourself, therefore, is to ask whether you're envying someone because they have acquired an unfair share of society's rewards, in which case your envy can energise you to seek social justice and equality, or whether someone was just born more naturally blessed than you. Tough. If so, it's much better to reflect on how that person's inborn gifts can enhance your own life. If Aristotle's fellow academicians had elected him their principal, he could have brought prestige to their institution rather than leaving and in due course founding his own rival university at Athens, the Lyceum. Their own now mediocre reputations would have been enhanced, being allowed to practice philosophy in his slipstream. As philosophers themselves, heaven knows, they might even have learned to enjoy being in the company of such a riveting thinker rather than resenting him. But in Aristotle's view, ambition is the hardest quality of character to get right. In fact, whatever you do in terms of ambition, you will be criticised. People are praised both for having it and lacking it. At times, as he says, we praise the ambitious man as manly and a lover of honourable things, or we praise the unambitious man as modest and temperate. But at other times, we blame a man for being ambitious if he seeks recognition more than is right or from wrong sources. We blame him as unambitious if he doesn't care less about being recognised, even on honourable grounds. Now, by ambition, Aristotle in Greek means a desire for public recognition and honour, not the more broadly defined and commendable desire to fulfil your potential for its own sake. Wanting to develop to the maximum your inborn talent to be the best possible violinist or footballer or parent or gardener or scientist is to be warmly encouraged and applauded in everyone. It takes a critic warped by irrational envy to object to anyone just being very, very good at what they do. The tricky bit is monitoring your own desires for recognition and rewards. As a society, we enjoy bestowing fame, prizes, marks of distinction on successful people. There are literary prizes, there are Oscars, there are sports competitions, there are Nobel Prizes, there are knighthoods, and there is the cover of Time magazine. There is nothing inherently wrong in enjoying that experience if you receive such an accolade. But the problem comes when the thirst for fame takes over from the desire to be good at what you do for its own sake. And fame can be profoundly disorientating and addictive, especially in the political arena, where the Greeks knew better than anyone if it's allied with political power. Aristotle's favourite play, Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus, portrays a leader who once worked for the good of the people, but who has let the desire to be considered the world's most intelligent and capable leader, along with the enjoyment of power, go to his head. One of the best examples in modern culture, I think, that Aristotle would be interested in is Willie Stark, the anti-hero of Robert Penn Warren's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, All the King's Men, 1946, made into two fine movies in 1949 and 2006. Now, Stark develops into a narcissistic and corrupt governor of a southern state. He revels in the glory he received as perceived champion of the little man and the applause he receives for his firebrand speech-making. But Willie actually began as an honest lawyer in an agricultural area. It was only when catapulted into the limelight that all humility was vanquished by his ambition to dominate the headlines. This negative ambition, a desire for glory, had supplanted his positive ambition, which was to lead and fairly represent his fellow citizens. It is, however, important to remember that modesty can be used as a stick to beat people with, especially women, in whom ambition to fulfill their potential and be recognised for it has historically been subject to far harsher criticism than in men. The question is always whether the ambitious person has lost sight of their original goals and replaced them with desire for maximum self-publicity. Fame junkies. So it'll become apparent by now that I enjoy using movies when teaching Aristotelian ethics. And these days the internet makes a world-class education available to anyone with a connection. Access to knowledge used to be dependent on access to a library. The context in which Nat Damon's working-class character in the movie Good Will Hunting, 1997, tells an arrogant Harvard student, you dropped 150 grand on an, can I say it here, fucking education you could have got for $1.50 on late checks at the public library. Aristotle thought you could add the theatre to the library in the pursuit of an education. The only leisure interest to which he devoted serious philosophical thought was literature, and dramatic literature is the central topic of his Poetics. It's actually remarkable and unremarked that he should have done this, because his teacher Plato had objected so strongly to the arts that he'd actually banned most of them from his ideal city-state in the Republic. Why would such a serious thinker as Aristotle spend so much time on thinking about the fictional stories enacted in popular theatre? The only explanation is that he was personally convinced that such entertainment had the potential to enhance the emotional and moral life, both of individual spectators and the community as a whole. And he also had first-hand experience and evidence of its social benefits. When he moved to Athens at the age of 49 or 50 to found that lyceum, he built it much nearer than Plato's Academy to the Athenian theatre of Dionysus on the south side of the Acropolis. Athens was still then a very vibrant, functioning democracy, and it was still the world's centre of dramatic entertainment and activity. Anyone in the Greek world who wanted to make their mark in the theatre automatically headed for Athens, just as aspiring movie makers head for Hollywood today. Athenian drama was designed not only to enthrall its spectators, but to train them in the cognitive, moral, and political skills they needed to run a healthy city. Now, occasionally, a public row still erupts over the limits of what's decent to ask people to watch or hear in a TV programme, movie, or stage play. Violence, bad language, sexual explicitness, nudity have been, and in many jurisdictions all over the world still are, subject to direct or indirect censorship. Monty Python's Life of Brian caused a scandal, was accused by some Christians of being blasphemous, and was still outlawed in the county of Devon until a few years ago. More recently, parents have been warned about the psychological desensitization to violence undergone to their children by movies and computer games, especially these first-person shooters. But this debate was first thrashed out in Plato's Academy. Aristotle was the first philosopher we know to provide theoretical arguments for the wonderfully educative potential of the arts. He thinks the producers of drama and democracy held such responsibility that they should be publicly appointed officials. He makes frequent use of examples from myths, theatre works, and epic poems in all his works. His discussions of excess and deficiency in human characters owes much to the stereotypes he'd watched in comedy. We can be sure that if he were alive today, he would have been an avid consumer of television programmes and novels and movies, and would have used them to illustrate moral points. In the second chapter of his Poetics, he asks why humans, unlike other animals, have such a thing as the arts at all. First, he says we're born with a greater instinct than other animals for imitation. Second, humans of all ages and occupations and classes enjoy imitative arts. We get pleasure from looking at pictures or enactments of reality. And pleasure for Aristotle, unlike some other ancient philosophers, is a good thing. By and large, nature uses pleasure to guide animals towards what's good for them. Nourishment, reproducing their species. In human, the advanced social animal, the pleasure we get from looking at pictures or watching plays can help us learn about the world. This is a totally revolutionary paragraph. He's noticed that we can not only hear but actually like looking at realistic pictures, artistic likenesses of things that would give us terrible pain rather than pleasure in reality. And the examples he gives are repellent creatures and human corpses. We may react badly when we see a real spider or jellyfish, but Aristotle knows, because he has dissected and drawn diagrams of them, that a picture of a cuttlefish can allow students of zoology to learn a great deal about that species, even if they feel sick if they see one, or have never even seen a marine invertebrate before. And his other example, corpses, is fascinating. On his argument, art allows us to learn about dead bodies, even those of people killed in horrific circumstances, learn even about something as frightening as death in a pleasurable way. Now, this, to me, unbelievably radical insight helps us to understand why we read novels, go to the art gallery, cinema or theatre, to immerse ourselves in worlds characterised by violence and suffering of an intensity and on a scale we would find unbearable if it was in front of our feet. We can educate ourselves about the suffering caused by the fascist bombing of Spanish towns from Picasso's Guernica. We can identify with the plight of African Americans in New York in the 1930s from Ralph Waldo Ellison's staggeringly brilliant novel, Invisible Man, 1952. We can learn about the experience of women incarcerated in federal prisons from Genji Cohen's Orange is the New Black. And this form of education, as Aristotle insists, gives pleasure not only to philosophers, but also in the same way to everyone else, even if to a lesser degree. When it comes to the arts and the acquisition of knowledge, he is an unimpeachable democrat. And his prescriptions for all the arts are simple. Arts need to offer either pleasure or something useful. Nobody will go to see a film if it's neither pleasant to watch nor remotely informative. But a good piece of art needs, he insists, to be both. And this precious, precious argument provides the critic of any artwork with a gold standard for evaluating its worth. The question, did I enjoy it? Oops, sorry, is very, very important. But if the answer to the question, did I learn anything from it, is negative, there has to be a question mark over its claim to high quality. It would be helpful if the commissioning producers and financiers of theatre and cinema would take more seriously their responsibilities to educate as well as entertain. The cinema has endless remakes, recycled plots, prequels, sequels, spin-offs involving comic book superheroes and gun-toting secret agents foiling alleged terrorist plots. Intensely noisy action sequences or elaborate digital visual sequences nowadays take up more of the film than dialogue. Bradley Cooper, this really upset me, was nominated for an Oscar in 2015 for Best Actor for his performance in American Sniper, when David Oyelowo was not nominated for his extraordinary realisation of the role of Martin Luther King in Selma. Now, it's not that American Sniper isn't enjoyable. The people are pretty, the acting's adequate, and there are a few nods to the emotional issues faced by soldiers. But where you can learn a great deal about the civil rights movement from Selma as well as enjoying it, you won't learn anything from American Sniper except how to handle a Macmillan TAC 338A rifle. Now, in the remainder of this talk, I offer some suggestions on movies which can inform discussion of some of the most important concepts in Aristotelian virtue ethics. Deliberation and decision-taking, identifying and fulfilling individual potential, dunamis, moral luck, the importance in assessing actions of the underlying intentions, means and ends, and when it's admissible to lie, and equity versus equality, and indeed responses to suicidal impulses. As it happens, there's actually a 2006 film with the title The Pursuit of Happiness, which offers a truly Aristotelian hero, played by Will Smith. He understands the nature of true happiness. He pursues it by sticking to his principles despite manifold misfortunes. The film's actually based on the autobiography of Chris Gardner, a San Francisco salesman, and the incorrect spelling of happiness in the title replicates that in a painting which still adorns the outside wall of the daycare centre that he sent his 4-year-old son to. In 1981, Gardner sees the potentiality of a new bone density scanner, invests all his savings in the product. There's a delay, sadly, between sales and the profits appearing in his bank account, which puts intolerable pressure on his marriage. He's concerned about his son, to whom at all times he is a deeply loving parent. He makes mistakes, including running away when he can't afford a taxi fare. He ends up in a police cell because he can't currently pay off his parking fines. But he never gives up, and he evolves morally as he repeatedly tries to do the right thing and finds solutions to what look like insoluble problems. Through a new contact, he lands an internship to train as a stockbroker, which is unfortunately unpaid, American capitalism. His wife leaves him, but he insists on keeping their son with him because he knows she's not a competent parent. With the boy, he undergoes even homelessness, but continues to turn up for work smartly dressed, and in the end does secure a paid position. He's persistent, focused, knows his own worth, never loses sight of his main goal, which is to provide a secure home for his son. It's deeply Aristotelian. And the sombre and inspiring story of Chris Gardner's determination to do the right thing can be watched alongside the Swedish comic drama Force Majeure. It's brilliant, 2014, directed by Ruben Östlund. The father figure here is the antithesis of Chris Gardner. On holiday in the French Alps, Thomas and his family think they're about to be engulfed by an avalanche. Thomas runs away, clutching the smartphone on which he's been filming the avalanche, leaving his wife and children behind. In the event, they all survive, but Thomas lurches between lies, refusal to accept he's put his own safety first, and fits of remorseful self-chastisement. His wife ends up doing something equally selfish. It's only the contrasting actions of another man called Mats that offers the audience a more ethical example of how to act for the collective good in a dangerous emergency. But the movie asks the dark question of how we would all react in a situation where we feared for our own lives. Now, Aristotle would not, I believe, have accepted the excuse offered by several characters that in difficult situations everyone just opts for personal survival. He'd have said that Thomas had not cultivated the reflex habits of unselfishness and responsible parenting that would have guaranteed he'd behave well even on autopilot. And the movie's careful to show us through small details that Thomas doesn't even try to do the right thing as a matter of habit. He lies about trivia, he cheats in games with his children, always a bad sign. In Force Majeure, we're shown individual moral agents reacting to random events, but the randomness does not mean they are not fully responsible for selfishness or otherwise in those reactions. It's very well watched alongside the exploration of moral luck in Florian Henkel von Dommensmarck's 2006 film Das Leben der Anderen, The Lives of Others. Gerd Wiesler is a Stasi agent who suddenly gets the chance, secretly, to do the right thing, to protect a dissident author and his lover, Christa Maria, an actress. Gerd uses his opportunity to make the right moral choice, and actually he's extremely lucky in several matters in terms of hiding his own clandestine activities from his fellow spies. Christa Maria, however, suffers both profound moral luck and its opposite. She betrays her lover, but she is lucky because her lover is saved when Gert intervenes. On the other hand, she's deeply unlucky in that she attracts the sexual attention of a corrupt and vicious government minister and dies in a road accident. But Gert steps up and acts virtuously when the opportunity arises. Now, choosing whether to do something with your life and create happiness proactively or retreat from it altogether is the fundamentally Aristotelian question underlying Pavel Pawlikowski's 2013 film Ida. It explores the dilemma of a novice nun in Poland. She's so traumatized by discovering she's Jewish and that as a baby she narrowly escaped being murdered alongside with her family in the Holocaust, that she simply can't cope with a normal constructive life, building a home, a family or anything else. Her lover, who's a jazz musician, pleads with her to leave the convent for good. Hey, he says, we'll buy a dog, get married, have children, get a house. Ida can't see the point and obliquely asks, and then? He answers, hey, the usual, life. She returns to the convent anyway. And she has one surviving aunt, Vanda, a prominent lawyer, who commits suicide partly because she can't bear to lose Ida to the nunnery. And the movie asks this question: what is the point of a life of social engagement where through activity and love you give your own life a purpose and make your own happiness? Now, we can see there might be individuals so damaged that this becomes impossible. But the Aristotelian in us desperately wants to intervene, stop Wanda jumping at her death, and persuade Ida to choose the usual life. Now, movies about identifying fulfilling potential against significant odds are actually really plentiful. I'm amazed at how many I could find here. There's an inspiring scene near the beginning of Hidden Figures, 2016, where Katherine Johnson's unusual gift for mathematics is recognised by the high school in the town of Institute, West Virginia. Now, it's crucial that this school admit her because her own county would not provide education for African American children past the 8th grade. Johnson only became the brilliant NASA mathematician whose calculations helped save the lives of Apollo 13 astronauts because her talent was spotted early and she was energetically mentored from the high school onwards by several teachers and professors. And potential, this is what Aristotle called dunamis, and the problems that come with failing to fulfill it are the central interest of a woman's decision. This is an outstanding, although now quite old, Polish film by Krzysztof Zanussi. But as the title suggests, it offers a perfect workout for deliberation. An Aristotelian obsession, actually, in the Nicomachean Ethics, how to deliberate. The central character is Marta, and she is in what she feels is a humdrum marriage. She has a little boy, a very lowly accounting job. She spends much of her time, the film is about deliberation, and she has to make important decisions about standing up for friends in the workplace and confronting her boss. She also has an affair and contemplates leaving her husband. But through facing her choices and grappling with their full implications, she's able to take the right decisions. Through this, she also grows in self-knowledge and happiness. It's a profoundly humane and adult film. And actually, so is the bittersweet comedy Juno. And its power comes from the way it traces the very long decision-making process of a 16-year-old girl who finds she's pregnant, must choose between abortion, adoption, and keeping the baby. The ending for Hollywood is weirdly unexpected and much more powerful for that. Now, it would be very fruitful, I think, to watch those two movies alongside Stephen Knight's Locke, 2014. I love this film. It's very unusual. It was made in real time. It shows a man with a responsible job in the construction industry, compellingly played by Tom Hardy, make several life-changing decisions in the space of a 2-hour drive between Birmingham and London. I've driven that motorway more times than I can remember. He receives or makes 36 phone calls, during which he supervises a very, very, very difficult and important concrete procedure, discovers a woman with whom he'd had a one-night stand has gone into labour, tells his wife about his infidelity, is kicked out of their home by her, deals with his son's pleas to return, and holds conversations with his dad as if he's a passenger in the car. The film really shows how many of us, especially with modern technology, make ridiculously slap decisions about even the most important things in life and under pressure of time and emotion. It's a fascinating exploration of how not to do deliberation, Boule US thigh, and the collateral damage that hasty decision-making inflicts on innocent parties. Perhaps the most difficult moral questions concern not a choice between two courses of action, but between intervening and not acting at all. Friends of mine know this is one of my hobby horses. You're worried that the child next door is being beaten. Do you contact the child welfare officials or keep quiet in case you're mistaken? One of your colleagues is embezzling company money. Do you tell your supervisors or keep out, fearful of being labelled a snitch? Now, this dilemma was brilliantly portrayed in Jonathan Kaplan's, I think, underestimated movie, The Accused, in 1988. This was the first ever film to explore the unfair treatment sometimes received by women who'd been raped and tried to seek legal redress. 4 college students raped a working-class woman, played by Jodie Foster, in a bar. It's based on a true story. One of them has a friend who's present. He does nothing to prevent the rape, although he's appalled as he looks on. He does, however, redeem himself by making that 911 call and notifying the police. It may be too late, but he does it. And his testimony plays a crucial role in the legal proceedings. Aristotle is actually the first moral philosopher very clearly to emphasize we can commit major injustices by omission as well as commission. The most succinct expression of this, and I will never ever forget reading this sentence as an undergraduate, comes in Nicomachean Ethics 3. Where we are free to act, we are also free to refrain from acting. Where we are able to say no, we are also able to say yes. If, therefore, we are responsible for doing a thing when to do it is right, we are absolutely responsible for not doing it when not to do it is wrong. Individuals who do find the courage to act in a good cause when it would be much safer to lie low and maintain silence are at the centre of all whistleblower plots, when whistleblowing is a huge subgenre at the movies. I like Michael Mann's The Insider, 1999, adapted from a true story. It's a very tense account of one man's courageous stand against the tobacco industry, risking financial ruin and public humiliation. And of course, Schindler's List 1993, the true story of a German businessman who saved more than 1,000 Jewish lives during World War II, won Steven Spielberg a really well-deserved Oscar for Best Picture. Thinking about means and ends, and when it's actually correct to tell lies, drives, which Aristotle is very interested in truth and not truth. And that drives the plot of Easy A. That's actually partly adapted from Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic novel, The Scarlet Letter, even though it's like a teen comedy. A teenage girl pretends she's had sex with a male friend in order to stop him being bullied for being gay. A much more serious study of lying with good intentions is presented in this, I think, massively underestimated movie, John Amill's Somersby, 1983. And the plot of that is partly inspired by The Return of Martin Guerre, but also by The Odyssey, beneath them both. It shows how a lie, which started out as completely self-seeking and immoral, turns into a lie maintained for altruistic reasons. Very complicated. A man returns from fighting in the American Civil War, Richard Gere, and falsely claims that he's the husband of Laurel Somersby. The couple fall in love, they have a child, and Jack Somersby, as he calls himself, helps freed slaves farm tobacco on his plantation. But the lie is discovered by local racists. They want to impede the new interracial venture. The real Somersby is dead, but had killed a man. So the imposter, Richard Gere, is faced with the choice of being tried and hanged for a murder he didn't commit, or coming clean about his identity. And he actually chooses to die in order to protect Laurel and the child from disgrace as an adulteress and a bastard, and to allow her to continue with the interracial project. So, in the end, he courageously maintains an altruistic lie that he's Jack Somersby, a lie he originally started telling for selfish reasons. It's very complex ethically. For intention, if you're Aristotle, must always be factored into our assessment of any action. And Roberto Benigni's haunting Life is Beautiful explores the sustained lies which a Jewish dad, Guido, tells his little son in a concentration camp in order to maximize the boy's chances of survival. Guido says they're playing a game in which his son needs to perform tasks which will win them points. These involve not asking for food, never crying, never saying he wants his mum. He must avoid attracting the guard's attention at all costs. That gets extra points. And this total fiction, of course, protects the boy from much suffering and in due course saves his life. And when it comes to equity, one of my favourite Aristotelian concepts, epieikeia, it's actually very hard to find movies. Aristotle gets too sophisticated for Hollywood. If we have the aim, like Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikado, of ensuring that the punishment fits the crime, history is far richer in examples than fictional movies. This is the principle that just having a one-size-fits-all law or rule does not work. Morality is particular, it's granular, it's about the detailed circumstances in every situation. Now, Aristotle has one of his most beautiful images here, which is that, the law might be just a ruler where you measure off a crime and you cut it off, or it can be like the fantastic form of measurement which Lesbian from Lesbos architects have evolved, which is a lead ruler, which you shape the law around the stone. It's a stunning image. So, if we're thinking about equity, it becomes very, very complicated. The Return is a devastating documentary film showing the dreadful consequences of California's 3 strikes law, which of course allowed no discretionary leeway over the sentencing of felons if they had 2 previous convictions, if they were convicted of a 3rd crime, if it involved violence. Right, life. Judges, jury could do nothing. When it comes to equity from the other direction, however, when the available laws just don't offer a sufficiently harsh penalty given the nature of the crimes. I have given up. Anybody who can find that movie, please let me know. The most notorious example amongst Aristotelian legal philosophers remains the Nuremberg trials, history again. The availability of the defense plea that the accused had only been obeying superior orders and the relatively light sentences received by some of those on trial as a result have been criticised as allowing some egregiously brutal individuals to escape the level of punishment which some say a sense of basic human fairness might expect. And of course, these were the subject of the path-breaking docudrama. I watched it again recently, Judgment at Nuremberg, which Stanley Kramer directed in 1961, and also a well-written TNT miniseries in 2000. If anybody can find me a really good movie about equity, I'll be very, very happy. Aristotelian ethics encourage us to plan our lives in terms of the endeavours we want to undertake in order to fulfil our human potential, so that we keep focused on the end of our lives and how we want to feel on our deathbeds. These days, there's a fashion for people who are dying to make lists of all the things they want to get done first. And the 2007 movie The Bucket List, directed by Rob Reiner, shows two dying men making a list of all their unfulfilled desires, which I find very odd, all of them, but there you go, and setting about fulfilling them. They include flying over the North Pole, visiting Mount Everest. The movie is motivational and actually has helped many people, I'm told, diagnosed with terminal illnesses. But so has Akira Kurosawa's amazing Ikiru, 1952, which is in its turn inspired by Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich. A Tokyo bureaucrat is diagnosed with terminal cancer. His response is to spend his last week successfully lobbying for a new playground to be open for the city's children. Now, Aristotle regarded life as wonderful. He disapproved of suicide, which he regarded as an attack on the society of which the suicidal person is a member. Professionals with expertise in suicidal people stress that the impulse is very often transitory and undeliberated. This makes it incompatible with the convinced Aristotelian's policy of doing the right thing in order to live well. Many people consider suicide when unhappy, especially in the aftermath of a bereavement or a broken relationship. But the Aristotelian will realize that everything changes, the future holds potential for happiness, overwhelming current despair. In the certainty that our emotional state will change, if an Aristotelian feels suicidal, she or he will instead manage to decide in ways which may seem much more difficult in the short term, going to the doctor, going on antidepressants, getting a psychotherapist, giving up toxic relationships. And this, of course, is the situation faced by George Valentin in Michael Hazanavicius's 2011 The Artist. Once a famous actor in silent movies, but now washed up, bankrupt, isolated and drunk, it's imperative that he be persuaded out of shooting himself just long enough to sober up, talk to his estranged girlfriend Peggy, except he needs to use different skills as a performer in the era of the talkies. His suicidal urge can be caught under control and happiness created once again in the future. The suicidal person, like Valentin, needs to think for the future, endure loneliness, count his blessings, throw himself into his work. And if we are looking after someone with suicidal impulses, it's incumbent upon us to assist them to make a similarly productive response. Now, this is unfortunately there will always be highly self-destructive individuals. We've all known some who cannot be talked out of self-destruction, indeed suicide. I found this movie by Michael Figgis, 1995. It's quite a cult movie, Leaving Las Vegas, absolutely shocking, morally shocking. I found this profoundly morally shocking because it seemed to me to heroise self-destruction. So the hero's response to losing his job and his family through his alcoholism is not to seek a cure for his addiction, but to drink himself to death in an apparently heroic way. Aristotelian ethics would have room for compassion for someone like that, but none for celebration. So I conclude with one final example, because despite being very funny, it's so self-consciously philosophical, and it does ask a fundamentally Aristotelian question. And I know all about the current thing about Woody Allen, and I'm ignoring it at the moment. Woody Allen's Crimes and Misdemeanors, 1989, which is partly inspired by Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, revolves around a murder committed out of brutal self-interest. Excuse me? Which goes unpunished, the murder goes unpunished. It asks whether life is worth living when there is no God and there is no moral power higher than humans who are morally incompetent to provide justice. Auntie May is an agnostic intellectual who's rejected traditional Judaism. She doesn't believe that we're punished in any afterlife. There's no providence. But she says you can nevertheless choose to be virtuous. Those who want morality, she says, there's morality. Hawley, on the other hand, mere Pharaoh, doesn't think there's any available moral approach that it'll ever be adequate. She says, no matter how elaborate a philosophical system you work out, it's got to be incomplete. Now, the movie concludes with the voice of the philosopher, Professor Levy, whose description of the human condition is a very bleak version of Aristotle's. He says, we're all faced throughout our lives with agonizing decisions, moral choices. Some are on a grand scale, but most of these choices are on lesser points. But we define ourselves by the choices we make. We are the sum total of our choices. Events unfold so unpredictably, moral luck so unfairly. Human happiness wasn't involved in the design of creation. That's actually a bleak Aristotelianism. But Levy, whose voice we hear, has, we find out, already committed suicide. He thinks it's only humans, and he says, their capacity to love that gives meaning to an indifferent universe. But Aristotle valued life so highly that he disapproved of suicide as a solution to the indifference of the universe. And he believed that other things, in addition to love, combine to give human life meaning, fulfilling our potential, sustaining affectionate relationships, acting rightly, inquiring, as he did in so many of his wonderful books on zoology and meteorology, into the nature of our beautiful, beautiful world. So Professor Levy may well have read Aristotelian ethics, but he had not digested their implications. Thank you.